We've been telling our viewers that they should be careful because many of the people that are talking about this narrative are getting paid to peddle that specific story. They're not necessarily trying to help you make an actually informed long-term decision. Hey everyone, welcome back to Chipstock Investor. Today we're going to be talking about one of our favorite companies, Aehr Test Systems. They just had their Q3 fiscal year 2024 earnings call, and we're going to talk about that in this video. The financials for the quarter were already disclosed a few weeks ago, and they came in exactly as Aehr said they would. You can see our last video a couple weeks ago on the specifics regarding these financials. We'll have that link here in the video as well as down in the description.
Before we talk about some of the specifics from the earnings call with CEO Gain Erickson, one of your favorite CEOs, Casey, let's catch up with where we're at. We originally bought Aehr Test Systems in late 2022, rode the very unexpected wave of growth through the first three quarters of 2023 and sold. And now we're back in dollar cost average mode again. The reason for these really wild cycles you can see reflected in that stock price is Aehr Test Systems is involved in the semiconductor manufacturing equipment part of the industry. It's a key supplier to manufacturers like ON Semiconductor, STMicro, Wolfspeed, Mitsubishi, and such. You can see that here in our semiconductor industry flow chart. You can find the manual and the full breakdown of that industry flow on our Ko-fi shop. And more recently, we just did our video and manual on the specific process steps of semiconductor manufacturing. Again, that manual on the Ko-fi shop, but Aehr Test Systems specifically falls in this test in burn-in part of the flow. After the wafers have been manufactured, and especially when we're talking about silicon carbide or SiC chips that are finding plenty of use in electric vehicles and other next-gen power infrastructure, it's become a critical part of that specific semiconductor device manufacturing process. But we're going through some growing pains for that market. We will refer to this again later in the video, but you can see there at the bottom, the auto and industrial market for semiconductors booming through late 2023 were potentially currently undergoing a bottom for demand before the next growth cycle kicks off. So that's what's going on here. That's why the stock has been absolutely clobbered. And rather than try to time the bottom, we've just been dollar cost averaging, DCAing back into this stock again.
So let's talk about the future for Aehr Test Systems. Let's break down the future potentials for growth for this company into 4 buckets. Let's start with the first one. The EV market is a mess for now. To be clear, if you're in North America and trying to get good understanding of the state of electric vehicles via your favorite news media outlet, we've been telling our viewers that they should be careful because many of the people that are talking about this narrative are getting paid to peddle that specific story. They're not necessarily trying to help you make an actually informed long-term decision.
So let's peel away some of the political and business jockeying over the EV market, because the original outlook is simply that we are going through a cyclical decline, but it's still a growth market overall. A new recovery is still on the table for the second half of 2024, which is fiscal 2025 for Aehr. And so that resumption of the growth story still very much remains intact. You can see this quote from Erickson that they are remaining cautious for the next quarter or two, but there are some signs of improvement. Basically, it's the customers that they had equipment orders from didn't cancel the orders for their test and burn-in systems. They just delayed them until later in this year. You could see that in the company's financial report showing a big increase in backlog of orders, that growing to over 24 million in backlog. So these test and burn-in machines still a necessity as these customers kind of retool their operations for that next growth cycle. Now, in that last quote, you also see that there was a new customer that was signed up. For obvious reasons, Aehr can't say who that is, but I think that is Vishay Intertechnology, ticker symbol VSH. Not coincidentally, they actually had their first ever investor day on April 2nd, where they talked a lot about silicon carbide. We have a video on that coming up real soon. Stay tuned for that.
Ericsson also commented on a recent visit to Asian silicon carbide suppliers and the EV suppliers themselves. He said that the tone there in Asia is much stronger outside of the US, particularly in two countries, in China and South Korea. And he said that the electric vehicle suppliers in China have a very strong focus on silicon carbide, to the point of actively marketing silicon carbide power conversion as a differentiating feature in their vehicles. He goes on to say that they visited several of those supplier stores, showing you this picture here from one of BYD's popular car models, the Dolphin. BYD has recently overtaken Tesla in selling the most electric vehicles last quarter. The moral of this story that Ericsson was telling is that Aehr is definitely trying to expand in what is basically a non-existent presence in China. You can see this worldwide customer base slide from the summer of last year's Investor Day. This was before the latest Fox wafer system that has become Aehr Test Systems' bread and butter. They have a lot of opportunity for growth as EV makers are retooling their models with new releases coming next year. It seems that the EV market is going through some growing pains at the moment, but is still in secular growth mode. So that's the silicon carbide market. Let's talk about the gallium nitride market. Could that be the next frontier for Aehr Test Systems?
Well, it certainly could be. This is another wide bandgap semiconductor substrate along with silicon carbide. So you probably saw in the last quarter, Aehr Test Systems did announce its first customer for gallium nitride test and burn-in systems. So there's obviously some growing potential here as the gallium nitride market starts to become an actual commercial endeavor, just like silicon carbide has the last few years. Gallium nitride, just like silicon carbide, is a wide bandgap semiconductor substrate. There is some overlap between the two. You can see from this slide that we've shared in the past from Infineon, the different applications of the two semiconductor materials. Silicon carbide very much getting used in the high voltage application parts of EVs and charging infrastructure, next gen power grid infrastructure, where high voltage and high heat is a key part of the design challenge. Gallium nitride early on has found a lot of use in consumer electronics, specifically just like the charging cables and charging packs for things like smartphones. We covered this last summer a couple of times when we talked about Navitas Semiconductor. NVTS is the ticker symbol on that. We passed on that one, just not a super exciting market, highly commoditized parts and pieces. If this is going to be broadly commercialized, like it seems like it could be, we like Aehr Test Systems as a better play on gallium nitride at this point than an actual manufacturer like Navitas. At this point, though, is silicon carbide that is the real moneymaker for Aehr Test Systems, not gallium nitride. That said, Aehr Test Systems has been able to adapt its equipment for what will be different test and burn-in requirements for gallium nitride versus silicon carbide, as these various companies like Navitas, but really all of the major IDMs, all the big manufacturers have announced either acquisitions of a gallium nitride startup or have been doing some sort of research and development into it. So we think that's where the real opportunity is. Aehr has adapted its equipment to service those big customers that it already has. And so if this does take off, we think Aehr will be a beneficiary of it. Too soon to tell though. Let's move on to bucket number 3, silicon photonics. Could this be Aehr's entryway into the data center?
What exactly are silicon photonics? Notice what Gain Erickson had to say on the earnings call. He explains that they are silicon-based semiconductors with integrated photon or light-based transmission of signals within and into and out of the silicon via laser photonic emitters and photonic receivers. So we're talking about laser beams.
Not those kind of laser beams. We're talking silicon-based devices that use lasers to transmit the data.
That's a little different than what Dr. Evil had in mind.
Very much so. The easiest application you can think of is the internet itself, which makes copious use of photonics to move massive amounts of data around at high speed. Much work has been put into bringing that same technology and shrinking it down to get it into very, very small chips or chip to chip and maybe chip system to chip system networking.
Yes, companies like AMD, NVIDIA, Intel, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, and Global Foundries have all announced plans for silicon photonics, integrated circuits, and integration of these in packages with other devices such as CPUs, GPUs, and AI processors, according to the earnings call. Erickson mentions that the Fox wafer level test and burn-in solution with the wafer pack full wafer contactors is a great fit for silicon photonics. And these next generation silicon photonics based integrated circuits can require up to 2 to 4 times as much power for full wafer test, burn-in, and stabilization.
Yeah, that's right. And that stabilization of the silicon photonics devices is not wholly dissimilar in practice from the stabilization required in silicon carbide. And so this isn't just about testing these silicon photonic devices to weed out a bad product. It's also about, again, burn-in, just like silicon carbide, basically a way to age the device so that the actual performance has stabilized before it goes on to final install in one of these data center systems. The key takeaway for this, though, Casey, is this is going to be a potentially big market eventually for Aehr Test Systems. Of course, all of these companies, AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel and such, are not talking about specific timetables as to when these next gen photonics will actually get put into the data center. We talked about this in an article write-up back in January 2023 after an Aehr earnings call. We're just going to have to wait and see how this third bucket works out as well. Could be a big market for them eventually. Okay, bucket number 4, memory chips and AI systems. This is obviously related to the last one, the data center photonics, but now we're moving to the memory chips and the AI systems themselves, including the logic chips.
Yes, memory test and burn-in was the original Aehr test and burn-in use case when Erickson took over as CEO over a decade ago. You can read some of the old earnings call transcripts to get a sense of what was going on at that time and why it never fully led to a boost for Aehr during the last decade. But with new demands being placed on these data center systems, thanks to AI, perhaps that original use case could finally be realized.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're back to working with some of those memory chip manufacturers to try to get these Fox test and burn-in systems into those fabs, but it's going to take some time for that to happen. Memory chip manufacturing is, of course, capital intensive, like any chip making, but the costs are very tightly controlled because of the extreme boom bust cycles that can take place in this segment of the market. And so test and burn-in equipment tends to be a highly commoditized part of this market. You can see, again, that test and burn-in section of our latest fab and packaging equipment manual. So if Aehr breaks into that part of the market, it's going to be tough to do so, and it is going to take a bit of time. Interestingly, though, it's not just the memory, it's not just the photonics, but some of these systems could also need the logic chips tested and burnt in as well, because of the new power demands and the new performance demands being placed on them from these massive AI systems. Aehr could again find some use case for its Fox systems if they can adapt those and get those into those fabs for testing the CPUs and GPUs, some of the high performance networking processors as well. We'll see. They have the equipment, they have the software, the automation that could lead to some new business down the road. But it's the same takeaway as before, right, Casey? This is an eventually market, perhaps, and eventually. At this point, what we're needing to focus on is the rebound of the electric vehicle market. That's going to be driven by demand for those silicon carbide chips. They're at the bottom, auto and industrial, primarily driven by the EV market, in particular for Aehr Test Systems. We could be in the midst of a bottom in that growth cycle. Do check out the last video we did on Aehr Test Systems, where we unpacked the financials a bit more, but talked about revenue dropping 56% year over year in this most recent quarter, Q3 fiscal year 2024, to a meager $7.6 million. The guidance for Q4, that's the period that ends in May. We're just a couple months away from the end of this quarter. The guidance is still implying a big uptick in quarter over quarter revenue. So a bottom could actually be forming. And by the time we hit fiscal year 2025, the second half of the current calendar year, 2024, Aehr could be back in growth mode. We'll have to wait and see.
Our ultimate takeaway on Aehr Test Systems right now is nothing has changed in the last couple of weeks since we did our last video. In fact, nothing has changed our minds since we restarted doing that DCA in late 2023 and early in this year of 2024. We still see ample opportunity for Aehr, and we really like this company. It's a well-run business, even though it does have some wild cyclical challenges and obviously some customers that are not completely transparent with Aehr. We still want to keep it as part of our small cap basket of stocks. And just as a reminder, we usually have at least 24 or more of these small cap companies that we have in our portfolios, so that the statistics of investing in small but future big potential stock investing can actually work in our favor. These are never more than 1% of our allocated maximum, and we allow them to prove it over time and organically earn their way into a larger allocation of our portfolio as they grow.
As I stated earlier, we are doing some investigative work on that Vishay Intertechnology, ticker symbol VSH. It's another small cap, but some interesting things happening in the silicon carbide market as the next generation, the next wave of EVs gets rolling off production lines by 2025 and 2026. So more on that later this week. We're also going to do some brief updates on Applied Materials and one of our top picks, again for 2024, Qualcomm, which is almost back to all-time highs again. We'll see if that run can continue.
Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss a video and have those notifications turned on. And of course, if you would like to check out our new semiconductor chip manufacturing and packaging equipment manual, we have that available in our Ko-fi shop or on Discord for our members. We'll see you all again soon later this week at Chipstock Investor.